So I wanted to talk about some of the things that you might notice if you want to use a Surface Pro for doing any art. And that is just some of the small tweaks that you might want to do to get better feedback when you're drawing. So I'm going to be covering what I talk about on the original Surface Pro 1. The Surface Pro 1 and 2 are very similar, so this stuff should also work for you if you have the 2. But if you have the Surface Pro 3 or newer, they have a redesigned pen and a redesigned pressure driver, so the models are actually fairly different. So a lot of this stuff in this video might not pertain to those newer models. Now I'm also going to be covering this information while using the Windows 10 Anniversary Update. And if you're not using the Anniversary Update, I heavily recommend that you upgrade to it if you're going to be drawing with the Surface. Because on the older version of Windows 10, you're going to run into weird intricacies and a whole bunch of workarounds. So first, how do you know if you have the Anniversary Update? The easiest way to find out is by looking at the bottom right of your taskbar. If your notification icon is the rightmost icon, then you do have this update. But if your clock is the rightmost icon, then you have the older version. But if you have the older version, you can always update to the Anniversary Update whenever you want. So if you haven't already, install the latest Wacom Feel driver. Even though we're actually not even going to look at the settings for this driver, it's really just the preferences as to how hard you want to push your pen down on your screen before you hit the maximum pressure limit. Everything we're going to be looking at is in the pen and touch settings in the control panel. More specifically, the settings for press and hold. This is where, depending on what programs you're using and what versions of the programs you're using, you may have to start using different settings. The press and hold is how long you have to keep the pen pressed on the screen for it to be considered a right click. And if we click and hold, we can see what it's doing. When we hold the pen to the screen, the circle bar appears and it fills up. And once it finishes, when we let go, it will right click in that spot. Now, of course, if you're moving, it's not going to affect this at all. You're not going to see this thing come up when you're drawing a line. But if you are doing a very precise line very slowly, you may see it pop up just as you're trying to start drawing the line. So the speed is how long before the circle comes up, and the duration is how long it takes before the bar in the circle fills up. I would definitely recommend setting both of these to long. The longer it takes for the bar to show up, then the longer it takes for that bar to fill up means that you can do a very slow line without this popping up immediately. And if this thing pops up, it's going to automatically right click, and the line that you're trying to draw won't be drawn because it right clicked instead. Now, it really isn't too bad. It sounds a lot more intrusive than it actually is. Now, you might be thinking, well, why don't I just turn this off? Some programs actually want this turned on. For example, I found that anything Adobe related, Macromedia, older versions of the software, anything CS5 and earlier, CS5 because I can test it, I don't actually have CS6, so I don't know if that's affected or not, but CS5 and older start to give you some really weird stuff if you have this off. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it has something to do with the legacy code wanting you to be able to right click. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that is the cause of it. So if we open Flash CS5, we can see that everything is working fine. I can navigate the program, I can use everything, but it isn't until I start drawing that we notice something acting weird. I'm trying to draw, but my cursor is stuck in the spot where I started. Even when I let go, it's not moving. I can't go back and click on anything. And it isn't until I move the cursor outside of the program that it registers that I've let go of the click. So watch, if I hover over to the computer, it just draws this really long line because that's where it let go. And it will do this for every single line that I try to draw. I have to scroll back down. So this is, if you're trying to draw and you realize this is happening, the solution for it is that right click. Alternatively, Photoshop will actually lock up inside of the program. So you have trouble actually navigating the interface. So I could do some of the stuff up here, but once I start to try to get into actually drawing, well, now it's stuck again. Touching any of the tool icons, well, now I'm stuck there. And once again, the only way to fix it is to scroll off of the screen. So I could try to pick my brush, scroll down, pick the brush, scroll down again, start to draw, scroll down, and it pretty much doesn't work at all. And one of the reasons I think it's legacy software is that this is Macromedia Flash 2004 doing the exact same thing, and I can't get it to stop until I scroll off the screen. Now there's also a press and hold setting for touch. This one has no effect over the software. That means you can have press and hold to right click with your finger turned on, but press and hold to right click with a pen turned off, and you will still run into the problem. Alternatively, if you have the Creative Cloud version of Photoshop, you can force it to use Windows Ink and bypass the Wacom driver entirely. By adding this text file to your Adobe Photoshop settings folder, you can uninstall the field driver and not even have to worry about it. I'll include this in the description. As far as I know, this only works for Photoshop CC, no other Adobe software. Anyway, this would be a good setup if you're someone who only uses Photoshop on here, or if your other programs work with Windows Ink, and Photoshop is the only one that's giving you a problem with pressure sensitivity. Now with all these settings, there is something I've noticed that I want to point out. However, it's so minimal that you might not even notice it. As I click and drag this folder in the range of only a few pixels, nothing happens. But once I move just a bit away from where the initial click was, that's when it finally starts to drag. This is a failsafe of just a few pixels, so you don't accidentally start dragging something when you click on it. This seems to affect each program differently. The first seems to be the case when drawing a vector line in any software that uses the Wacom driver. Just like the folder, once I pass that threshold, it begins to draw my line. Notice how there isn't that small jump and the line starts immediately when the pressure is turned off. However, drawing in any program when you're not using vectors doesn't do this. The Photoshop lines work as you would normally expect them to work, but Photoshop does seem to do it in two different places, moving the window in the navigator and moving any of the sliders for the brush size. Compare that to the sliders or the scroll bar in Flash that don't actually let you slide until you pass that threshold where it would snap back. So that's it. I know this is a big topic and there's a lot of tiny tweaks that you could make to stuff. So if you've got any questions on anything that isn't in here, shoot them over. Thanks for watching, everybody.